Hello, everyone. Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee's online worship service. I'm Reverend Dina McFeeters, and I'm honored to serve as Associate Minister. We welcome people of all genders, sexualities, ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies. We welcome your mind, your heart, and your spirit. We welcome all that you are carrying with you today and all that your heart longs to set down. We'd like to pay a special welcome to guests joining us today. If you're visiting for the first time or joining us from afar, why don't you say hello in the chat and tell us where you're joining us from? I welcome you to our worship service today by inviting you to repeat our mission after me. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action. Let's return to our beloved sanctuary for the lighting of the flaming chalice, symbol of Unitarian Universalism.
Good morning. I'm Ann Hefter, and I'm happy to be your worship associate this morning. Today I will be reading a poem, Try to Praise the Mutilated World by Adam Jagoszewski. Try to praise the mutilated world. Remember June's long days, and wild strawberries, drops of rose wine, the nettles that methodically overgrow the abandoned homesteads of exiles. You must praise the mutilated world. You watch the stylish yachts and ships. One of them had a long trip ahead of it, while salty oblivion awaited others. You've seen the refugees going nowhere. You've heard the executioners sing joyfully. You should praise the mutilated world. Remember the moments when we were together in a white room and the curtain fluttered? Return in thought to the concert where music flared. You gathered acorns in the park in autumn, and leaves eddied over the earth's scars. Praise the mutilated world, and the gray feather a thrush lost, and the gentle light that strays and vanishes and returns. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dale Skaggs. I've been a member of First Church since 2007, and I'm delighted to share some thoughts about living in the gap. This world is a total mess. Wars grind on interminably. Desperate people fleeing poverty and violence die in darkness. Pandemics surge unpredictably. Weapons of war are unleashed in schools, churches, and on Main Street. The planet itself seems about to implode in a fury of wind and water, or drought and desiccation. And our political and civic institutions seem incapable of effective response. And this world is indescribably beautiful. In dawn twilight, pileated woodpeckers soar through woodlands and goldfinches flash past gardens. In the face of war, mass shootings, pandemics, and typhoons, immensely courageous people put themselves in harm's way to save the lives of strangers. Love shines in the faces of volunteers who serve the hungry and the homeless. An astonishing generosity of spirit offers forgiveness for the unforgivable. Every day, individual people stand up under terrible pressure as witnesses to truth and justice. And in the natural world, beauty happens everywhere, all the time, even when we aren't there to see it. Some days it's a challenge to know how to live in such a world. But it's the world we have, and it's where we live, in the paradox of simultaneous opposites and in the gap between the hard realities of what is and the possibility of a better future we know is possible. Some days it's tempting to just make a mantra of the assurance from the 14th century English anchoress known as Julian of Norwich, who wrote that all will be well, and all will be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Other days, the temptation is toward an exhausted resignation that Thomas Hobbes probably had it right, that when we are left to our own devices, life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. It's been said that optimism and pessimism aren't really opposites. They are only two different forms of the same surrender to the desire for simplicity. Taken far enough, the optimistic view lets me withdraw from difficult issues, telling myself that all will be well, no matter what I do. The pessimist sees the same issue, recognizes its difficulty and scope, and concludes there's nothing they can do that will make a difference. These two seemingly very different paths arrive at the same simple answer. Whatever I do or don't do won't really make any difference. We are drawn to that response because it allows us to avoid the uncomfortable tension of discernment, decision, and action in an uncertain world beset with urgent problems. Our search for answers in our high-tech world might take us to the University of Google with its endless number of self-help offerings, where you will find, as it seems to me anyway, something of an attitude that says you only need yourself, you can do it alone, independent, and self-reliant. I wonder, is it only me, or do others think there is something oxymoronic about the term self-help? That word help seems more useful to me as an action of human connection, rather than action in isolation. One subset of self-help suggestions is all about the power of gratitude, the importance of considering your good fortune every day, the value of a gratitude practice. And there can be much that is positive in those practices, but only, I think, when held in a both-and awareness of blessings and sorrows. Acknowledging only the positive, refusing to look at life's darkness to avoid my discomfort there, separates me from the wholeness of life. Cognitive scientist and humanistic psychologist Scott Barry Kaufman, writing in The Atlantic, says this can become a toxic positivity, which is in the end a denial of reality. Telling someone to stay positive can backfire and actually make them feel worse because it feels like a denial of their reality of suffering. Or it sounds like, please don't tell me more, I can't handle your pain. An example from my own experience is that during the early days of my wife Linda's cancer diagnosis and chemotherapy, I created a Caring Bridge site to keep our family and friends updated on her situation. One of our old friends from our years on the East Coast followed the site closely, and no matter how worrisome the contents of my message, his comments were always what I came to think of as aggressively optimistic, with no apparent acknowledgement of how difficult and frightening our situation seemed to us. He meant well, of course, but what makes such positivity toxic is that we feel divided, even from those who care. We hide our very real pain, disappointment, and sadness from the world, and even from ourselves. We try to show the world a sunny face, even when that face is only a mask, a false front. Kaufman says the antidote to toxic positivity is tragic optimism, a phrase coined by Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl. Tragic optimism requires a search for meaning amid life's inevitable sorrows, a perhaps realistic and practical response to hard realities. And that search requires courage. Many years ago, Linda and I were at a friend's flat in Paris when I learned of the hard reality that my father was dying. As I was leaving to fly home, hoping to arrive in time to say goodbye, I asked my friend Annie to wish me good luck. She responded quite fiercely, "I will not wish you good luck." Then she put her hands on my shoulders and said gently, "I do not wish good luck. I say bon courage. I say whatever comes, may your heart find good courage. Bon courage." Well, as luck would have it, my father died while I was in the air over the English Channel. Luck can go either way, but your courageous heart will be steady ground. So, how can we find our way to a life-giving and sustainable path in the gap between toxic positivity on the one hand and despairing pessimism on the other? Where is that solid ground? The poet Wisława Szymborska hints at an answer in her poem, A Few Words on the Soul. Because joy and sorrow aren't two different feelings for it, she wrote, the soul attends us only when the two are joined. If she's right, my soul, or my authentic self, only comes alive and flourishes when I stand, eyes open, my heart holding both sides of the paradox that is our known reality. Life is excruciatingly hard, and life is ineffably beautiful. I earlier mentioned Julian of Norwich and her famous assurance that all will be well. But she also understood the both and in human existence. We experience a wondrous mix of well and woe, she wrote. The mingling of both well and distress in us is so astonishing that we can hardly tell which state we or our neighbor are in. The Sufi mystic Rumi understood this well and suggested a way to live in that gap in his poem, The Guest House. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. the dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. I sure hope he's right in that part about being cleared out for some new delight. Last year, I read the book, The Body Keeps the Score by psychiatry professor Bessel van der Kolk, about how trauma can embed in our body memory as well as our conscious memories. It was fascinating. And it woke up a lot of very old traumas in me. For several months now, with the help of a therapist, I've been doing something akin to what Rumi urges, confronting the sources of my PTSD and the unwelcome behaviors it has prompted. I have encountered all the guests in Rumi's guest house. I am striving to entertain them and be grateful for their guidance, but so far, I can only aspire to obey Rumi's admonition to welcome them laughing. And I'm learning and relearning that trying to bar the door against them for so many years only left me too often brokenhearted, living a divided life. In his 2004 book, A Hidden Wholeness, The Journey Toward an Undivided Life, educator and author Parker J. Palmer wrote about what he called the tragic gap, the gap between what is and the better thing that we know is possible. The title of the book is drawn from Thomas Merton's statement that there is in all things a hidden wholeness. Palmer's book says that wholeness, the real integrity of who we are, is often hidden from the world and from ourselves because we fear exposing our faults and failures, or we're afraid we cannot achieve what our hearts tell us our calling is meant to be. Some call that inner wholeness the soul, others call it our inner wisdom, our true self, or our inner teacher. But by whatever name, it is the source of the courage we need to stand in the tragic gap. Palmer wrote that we must develop what he called a habit of the heart, an ability to hold the tension of opposites, and that if we want to live nonviolent lives, we must learn to stand in the tragic gap, faithfully holding the tension between reality and possibility in hopes of being opened to a third way. He is an elder in the Religious Society of Friends, the Quakers, long known as pacifists. But his sense of the violence to be resisted is much broader, deeper, and more subtle than simply an opposition to war. He recognizes the smaller acts of violence done to so many. Employees are treated as disposable. Teachers demean a struggling student. We hurl insults across the gap between us and our political opponents, labeling them at best stupid or even evil. All of these are examples of ways we, in Palmer's words, violate the identity and integrity of another person. And this propensity for violence is rooted in the frightened isolation of divided lives. Palmer's book describes a circle of trust, which at its simplest is a space which holds the paradox of honoring the integrity of the individual and honoring the resources and power of community. I find a similar paradox in my understanding of First Church. Here we believe that each person is their own spiritual authority, responsible for their own search for meaning. And, there's that word again, and we know that to discover the full meaning of human experience, we must be in community with each other. We are a community of solitudes. And I've often thought that we come here to First Church to help each other know how to live a whole life in this broken and beautiful world. In his 2011 book, Healing the Heart of Democracy, Palmer revisited the tragic gap, saying that if we wish to heal our democracy, we must find the courage to stand and act with hope in that gap between the hard reality of our political and societal dysfunction and the vision we share of a whole and healed nation. When the tension in the gap seems unbearable or even heartbreaking, Palmer offers a way to think about that heartbreak. Instead of letting our hearts break apart into bitter shards of angry words, he encourages us to let our hearts break open to a deeper understanding, compassion, and possibility. I experienced that tension in the political sphere in the aftermath of the 2020 election. Over many years, I've enjoyed a very warm and friendly relationship with my elderly neighbors up by our farm in Door County. They had a Trump-Pence sign in their front yard, so their political leanings were no secret. And I put out some Biden-Harris signs just to provide some balance in the neighborhood. The first time I stopped by their house after the election, I was very sorry to feel a definite coldness from them. But I just took a deep breath and I sat in their kitchen, chatting about farm stuff for a few minutes. I returned occasionally, despite the lack of warm welcome, and believe me, it was excruciating, almost heartbreaking, to keep trying while wondering if they would ever soften. But we eventually found our way back to our old ways, being good neighbors who loan and borrow tools and help each other out. It took a long time, and it was very hard, but it was worth it, well worth it in the end. An inability to hold the tension of opposites and the ambiguity of paradox drives us to extremes and widens the gap between us and those who live and think differently. But it is essential to our form of government that we learn to tolerate and even welcome that tension. If we look for them, there are inspiring examples of ordinary citizens who have lived that tension and made it a life-giving force. One such example is an incredibly tragic and painful story to remember. And it is a deeply moving story of the courage to live the gap. You may recall the trauma back in October 2006 of a mass shooting on a beautiful morning in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, when a 32-year-old husband and father of three walked into a one-room Amish schoolhouse. He tied up 10 little girls between the ages of 6 and 13. He shot and killed 5 and injured the others before he killed himself. In sympathy with that peaceful, terribly violated community, it seemed the whole nation felt an immense grief and a terrible anger at the gunman. But astonishingly, on the day of that man's funeral, nearly 30 Amish men and women, some the parents of the victims, came to the cemetery and formed a wall to block the view of media cameras. Parents whose daughters had died on that terrible morning approached the man's parents after the burial and offered condolences for their loss. This nearly incomprehensible act of forgiveness could only make sense within an understanding that they were all grieving. They were all struggling to make sense of the senseless. A newspaper article written 10 years later reported that the Amish families were still consciously deciding to forgive every day, still standing in that tragic gap, still holding the excruciating tension between the heartbreak of their loss and their decision to forgive, still finding the courage to let their hearts break open again and again. That Amish community's capacity for forgiveness is probably beyond many of us. But may we aspire to find equal courage to stand and act in the tragic gap. In this broken and beautiful world, may we embrace the paradox of joy and sorrow joined. May we learn to hold the tension of living in the gaps between what is and what is possible. And even though we know that gap will never be completely closed, may we transform that tension into a generative energy that will fuel our work toward a better country in a healed world. May it be so.
Dear ones, I'll leave you with these closing words by Arthur Foote. May peace dwell within our hearts and understanding in our minds. May courage steel our wills and love of truth forever guide us. May it be so.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah.